She walks into the club like she owns it. Because, in a way, she does. The DJ turns up the volume. The crowd pulses with anticipation. And there, in the epicenter of all eyes and all flashbulbs, stands Paris Hilton. Diamond-studded, camera-ready, immaculately curated. She smiles, and the room bends around her. To some, she's just a shadow of a tabloid past. A glittering ghost of early 2000s chaos. The original influencer. The first reality star. The face of a moment in pop culture we all thought we left behind. But you didn't leave her behind. You bought her perfume. Watched her shows. Quoted her catchphrases. You kept her alive by doubting her. And she kept cashing the checks. Because while you were rolling your eyes, Paris Hilton was rolling out a blueprint. She became the prototype of the modern celebrity entrepreneur. The architect of brand-first fame. She was the original social media before social media even existed. A walking brand before the word branding was currency. And yet, for years, the world missed the point. They saw scandal, not strategy. Glamour, not grit. Gossip, not growth. What they never understood was this. Paris Hilton was never playing the game. She was designing it. From the moment she stepped into the spotlight, Paris wasn't chasing fame, she was monetizing it. And the image she gave the world? That wasn't naivety. That wasn't who she was. That was inventory. The blonde hair. The tiny dog. The pink Bentley. That's hot. It wasn't a lifestyle, it was packaging. Every stereotype she leaned into was a product waiting to be sold. Every camera flash was marketing. Every tabloid cover, free promotion. Every viral moment, an ad. They called her fake. But the money was real. And the business? Smarter than anyone dared to admit. The girl who got famous for doing nothing turned around and built a licensing empire. She didn't wait to inherit the Hilton fortune. She built one of her own. With perfume deals, DJ sets, NFTs, and a global media company. With handbags, hair extensions, cookware, and skincare. She turned public perception into her primary resource and then weaponized it for profit. The irony? The more people underestimated her, the stronger her brand became. Because doubt is a powerful currency when you know how to flip it. While the world debated whether she was clever or clueless, Paris Hilton was becoming a millionaire over and over again. Not despite the act, but because of it. There's a certain genius in letting people believe they're smarter than you. Because once they look away, you've already won. And that's what she did. Again and again. For years. But here's the twist most people still haven't caught. Paris Hilton didn't become wealthy in spite of her image. She became wealthy through it. The party girl persona? A mask. The dumb blonde voice? A tool. The scandals? Calculated risk. And every time the world thought she was fading, she was just evolving. Pivoting from perfumes to NFTs. From paparazzi to boardrooms. From reality TV to real investments. This isn't a story of luck. This is a story of control. Because when you control your image, you control the narrative. And when you control the narrative, you control the money. So ask yourself, what if everything you thought about Paris Hilton was wrong? What if the illusion you laughed at was the very thing that made her rich? What if she played the fool to build a fortune? They called her the heiress. The last name said it all. Hilton. A dynasty built on marble lobbies, rooftop views, and golden keys. To the outside world, Paris Hilton was born into opulence, raised in excess, and destined for a life where money would never be a question. She didn't need to work. She didn't need to hustle. She didn't need to build anything. That was the myth. But myths are built on assumptions. And this one? It was never true. Because when Paris was 26 years old, the inheritance she'd supposedly been born into disappeared. Her grandfather, Baron Hilton, head of the Hilton Empire, stunned the family and the world by pledging 97% of his $4.5 billion fortune to charity. The Hilton Foundation would be his legacy, not his descendants. Not even the one carrying his name on every magazine cover. That was the moment the story changed. The girl the media had painted as spoiled, shallow, and trust fund fed suddenly had no trust fund to fall back on. The safety net was gone. The Hilton name wouldn't make her rich. And so, she decided to make herself rich. But this wasn't some Cinderella story where the heiress discovers hard work for the first time. Paris had already been working, just in a language the public didn't know how to read. The language of attention. The language of brand. Because Paris Hilton understood early what most celebrities took decades to learn, that fame itself was a form of capital. It could be multiplied, scaled, monetized, but only if you knew how to use it. So she started with the one thing she had in abundance, her image. She wasn't cast in Hollywood. She wasn't chosen by fashion. She didn't inherit an audience. She manufactured one. Carefully, relentlessly. She turned the flash of the paparazzi into a business plan. Every red carpet became a runway. Every tabloid scandal became free marketing. Every criticism became a spotlight. She trademarked her voice, copyrighted her catchphrases, turned a reality TV role into a syndication deal, and turned "that's hot" into a multi-million-dollar slogan. The public thought they were watching her rise. What they didn't see was her design. Because Paris Hilton wasn't just navigating celebrity culture, she was building the map. She used her last name not as a crutch, but as a launchpad. And then, she did something far more difficult. She made that name her own. The Hilton family had hotels. Paris created a brand. And that brand would eventually stretch across over 45 retail locations, 19 product lines, and bring in over $4 billion in fragrance sales alone. Not because she was handed a legacy, but because she built one. She leaned into the caricature, the party girl, the baby voice, the walking contradiction, not as a reflection of who she was, but as an avatar she could control. And when you control the character, you control the narrative. So while the public debated whether she was famous for nothing, she was turning that very conversation into a business. You can laugh at the persona, dismiss the pink, underestimate the packaging. But the moment you did, she'd already won. Because Paris Hilton didn't just survive losing the Hilton fortune. She outgrew it. And in doing so, she taught a quiet, brutal lesson. Legacy means nothing if you don't know how to build one of your own. It started with a scent. Soft, sweet, sparkling, innocent, but bold. It smelled like a fantasy. But it was the beginning of a financial empire. In 2004, Paris Hilton walked into the fragrance industry, a world dominated by old luxury, legacy names, and exclusivity, and did the unthinkable. She launched her own perfume. Not a celebrity endorsement. Not a licensing deal that borrowed her name and threw her a check. No, this was different. This was Paris Hilton entering the arena as a creator, as an owner, as the face, and the force behind the product. And it exploded. That first fragrance, simply titled Paris Hilton, was a retail phenomenon. It broke expectations, shattered stereotypes, and laid the foundation for what would become one of the most profitable celebrity fragrance lines in history. Over the next decade, she launched not one or two more scents, but over 25, each with its own aesthetic, its own audience, its own identity, but all unmistakably Hilton. They weren't just perfumes. They were portals into a lifestyle, a feeling, a dream she had been selling since she first appeared on screen. And people bought it, by the millions. Globally, her fragrances have earned over $2 billion in revenue. Let that number sink in. This wasn't a lucky hit. This was longevity, strategy, brand science at scale. Paris understood something the industry ignored. Perfume isn't about scent. It's about story. It's not what it smells like, it's what it says. And Paris Hilton knew exactly what she wanted it to say. That you could be bold and beautiful, glamorous and powerful. That the same girl they called shallow could run a global business with the poise of a CEO. But here's the twist most people missed. Paris Hilton was selling more than just a bottle. She was selling herself. The myth, the image, the fantasy, all perfectly packaged and atomized into glass. She made luxury accessible, mainstream, aspirational but affordable. The same way she'd made herself into a character the world couldn't look away from, she made her perfumes into objects people couldn't stop buying. And every spritz was a transaction, a transformation, an invitation into her world. Behind the scenes, she wasn't just signing deals. She was involved in scent selection, packaging, design, and marketing. This wasn't passive income. This was performance art as enterprise. And while critics wrote her off as another celebrity slapping her name on a product, Paris was doing something they never expected. She was building a consumer base, a global network of loyal buyers who didn't just like her. They trusted her brand. That loyalty would become the backbone of everything that came next. Fragrances gave her more than money. They gave her proof that she wasn't a fluke, that she wasn't dependent on headlines or scandals, that she could create something real, tangible, and sell it better than anyone else. In a world where female entrepreneurs are scrutinized more than celebrated, Paris Hilton built an empire under everyone's nose. Quietly, elegantly, strategically. The woman they thought had no depth had just created one of the deepest consumer brand plays in celebrity history. She turned a sin into a symbol. She turned a name into a global enterprise. And all the while, she smiled. Because while they were busy smelling the perfume, they never saw the power behind it. The music hits. The lights drop. The crowd pulses. And in the middle of it all, on stage, on beat, commanding thousands with a single flick of her hand, is Paris Hilton. Yes, that Paris Hilton. Not in stilettos on a red carpet. Not clinking champagne in a reality TV confessional. But behind a mixer. In control. Not a guest of the party, but the reason it exists. This was not the Paris the world expected. And that's exactly why it worked. When she first stepped behind the decks in 2012, the backlash was immediate. The disbelief was loud. DJs mocked her. Fans rolled their eyes. Critics called it a gimmick. Another socialite playing pretend. But what they didn't realize, what they refused to believe, was that Paris Hilton wasn't playing. She was pivoting. And this move? It was brilliant. Because in the music world, performance is power. Control the crowd, and you control the culture. Paris saw the opportunity not as a party, but as positioning. She wasn't just spinning tracks, she was building brand equity in a new market. And while the world debated whether she was legit, Paris was booking festivals. Booking Vegas. Booking Ibiza. The biggest stages. The most elite clubs. Not because she had a famous name. Because she could deliver. And the money? It followed. Paris Hilton quickly became one of the highest-paid female DJs in the world, earning up to $1 million per set. Not per tour. Per night. Because what she was selling wasn't just music, it was spectacle. It was her. A Paris Hilton performance was a brand event. The visuals, the sound, the fashion, the presence. It was the product of everything she'd learned from 2 decades in the public eye curation, persona, and audience control. And it wasn't random. It was rigorously rehearsed, sound-designed, choreographed to deliver maximum impact. People underestimated her because they didn't understand the rules of the game she was playing. Paris understood the economics of experience. That in a world overloaded with content, feeling is what people pay for. Her DJ career wasn't a detour. It was a vertical expansion. A new asset in her portfolio. A high-margin business powered by presence and prestige. And most importantly, it was hers. No middlemen. No licensing. No ghost branding. Just Paris on the stage, running the show. She wasn't a featured guest in someone else's nightlife empire. She became the empire. This wasn't a vanity project. It was strategic reinvention. The same way she once turned famous for nothing into fragrances, she now turned party culture into profit. And she didn't stop with gigs. She launched her own music. Headlined festivals. Produced tracks. Even performed for royalty. And every time someone mocked her, she added another zero to the contract. Because Paris Hilton had figured it out long ago. The more people doubt you, the more power you gain, if you know how to use it. And she did. She weaponized ridicule. Converted disbelief into attention. Turned skepticism into streams. And by the time her critics caught up, the set was already over. And she was on a plane to the next gig. Or the next brand deal. Or the next 7-figure performance. Paris Hilton didn't break into music. She rewrote the terms. She didn't ask to be taken seriously. She just made sure she was paid like it. By the time the world started whispering about NFTs, Paris Hilton was already speaking their language. Long before people made headlines, before digital wallets became status symbols, before JPEGs were auctioned at Christie's, she was watching, learning, building. To the untrained eye, it looked like just another trend. A speculative bubble. A playground for crypto fanatics and tech futurists. But Paris didn't see hype, she saw architecture. Infrastructure. A future where ownership would no longer depend on contracts and corporations, but code. And she wanted in before the velvet rope dropped. She didn't just endorse the NFT movement. She entered it as a creator. As a collector. As a visionary. Because once again, Paris Hilton saw a platform not for what it was, but for what it could become. In 2021, she launched her own NFT collection, an elegant, surreal blend of digital portraiture and personal mythology. The pieces shimmered with iconography, crowns, diamonds, galaxies, reflections of a brand that had always thrived on duality, illusion, and intimacy. Public and private. Fantasy and finance. One piece sold for over $1.1 million. But that number, impressive as it was, paled in comparison to the statement it made. Paris Hilton, once ridiculed as a tabloid construct, was now setting the pace in a financial and technological movement that most of Hollywood didn't even understand. She didn't stumble into success. She engineered it. She studied blockchain technology, collaborated with leading digital artists, appeared not as a celebrity accessory but as a central figure in panels and conferences that defined the shape of Web3. And in doing so, she appended yet another narrative. Because this wasn't about digital art. Not really. This was about reclaiming control. For decades, she had played the game of licensing. Her name on perfumes, her face on billboards, her voice clipped into sound bites sold around the world. But NFTs offered something radically different, true creative sovereignty. A chance to monetize not just her image, but her intention. No middlemen. No gatekeepers. No studios slicing the pie. Just a direct line between artist and audience, mediated only by a blockchain that could neither be bribed nor broken. It was, in every way, the opposite of how she first became famous. And yet, it was perfectly in line with how she stayed wealthy. Because Paris Hilton's success has always been about foresight. Not luck. Not inheritance. Not accident. She built her first fortune from a persona. Now, she was building a legacy from principles, scarcity, authenticity, decentralization. While others argued over whether NFTs were art or scam, future or fad, she simply created. She minted. She moved. And as she did, her influence in the crypto space deepened. Her voice carried weight not because of celebrity, but because of clarity. She understood the product, the audience, and most of all, the psychology. She knew what people wanted: connection, exclusivity, and a piece of something bigger than themselves. And she sold exactly that. Not tokens. Not files. Emotion, ownership, and digital intimacy wrapped in scarcity. This wasn't about jumping on a trend. It was about owning the next era. Paris Hilton didn't need to be taken seriously. She just needed to be early. And while others were still trying to decode the blockchain, she had already minted her message, sold the art, built the brand, and moved on to the next frontier. For years, the narrative wasn't hers. It belonged to the press, the paparazzi, the tabloids that fed on controversy and printed fiction as fact. Her image was licensed, misused, stretched into caricature. She was a character in a cultural circus, and she played the role because she knew the role sold. But eventually, Paris Hilton wanted more than control over her brand. She wanted control over the lens itself. And so she built it. In 2021, she quietly launched 1111 Media, a full-fledged entertainment and intellectual property company, designed not just to protect her voice, but to amplify it across platforms she could own, direct, and monetize on her terms. This wasn't a pivot. It was a reclamation. 1111 Media is more than a production studio. It's a philosophy disguised as a business. A belief that the future of celebrity isn't about being seen. It's about shaping the seeing. Through television, podcasts, digital content, merchandise, music, and immersive experiences, she began constructing a new media empire, one where she no longer had to ask permission to speak. Because this time, Paris Hilton wasn't pitching a show. She was greenlighting one. Her first major move? This is Paris, a documentary that dropped the facade and showed the world something it had never seen before: her reality. Not reality TV reality, but the pain, vulnerability, and trauma behind the persona that made her famous. It shocked the public, because the story was finally hers. The documentary pulled in millions of viewers. Critics called it raw, revealing, even redemptive. But more importantly, it reset the narrative. Paris Hilton had spent 2 decades as a symbol of artificiality. And in one move, she turned that symbol inside out. She proved she wasn't just a brand. She was a person. And she was taking her power back. 1111 Media followed with a slate of bold ventures. Fiction, nonfiction, scripted, unscripted. Licensing deals. Podcast production. Brand partnerships with equity, not endorsement. Every project aligned to a singular thesis. The world no longer wants content fed to them. They want connection. And Paris had spent her entire life learning how to create it. She didn't build 1111 Media just to tell her story. She built it to tell others. To give voice to those who, like her, had once been misunderstood, underestimated, or misrepresented. Survivors. Creators. Misfits turned moguls. Because Paris knows what it feels like to be underestimated, and what it takes to turn perception into power. And she also knows this. Media is no longer just what you watch. It's where power lives. Where reputations are built, destroyed, and rebuilt again. So she moved behind the camera, into the boardroom, and onto the contracts. No longer the subject, now the architect, now the gatekeeper. And in doing so, she became something most celebrities never do. She became unavoidable on her own terms. Not as the party girl, not as the DJ, not even as the billionaire businesswoman, but as the producer of reality itself. She didn't just rewrite her story. She bought the pin. It was never about being famous. Not really. Paris Hilton understood that fame, by itself, is just noise. Temporary. Fleeting. It flickers bright, burns fast, and disappears into the next headline. But wealth, real wealth, is architecture. And reputation, if built correctly, becomes infrastructure. Not just a story you tell, but a platform you stand on. She was born into a name, but she built a brand. And that brand, flexible, provocative, polarizing, became her engine. An engine that would generate over $300 million in personal fortune, and billions more in associated sales, partnerships, and media value. She began her journey as the subject of gossip columns, late-night monologues, and internet ridicule. She ends it as the founder of a global content empire, the face of a billion-dollar fragrance portfolio, a headline DJ, a savvy investor in NFTs, and an architect of a business model now studied by marketing strategists and MBA candidates alike. The question was never whether she was serious enough to run an empire. The question was whether the world was smart enough to see that she already had. She turned ridicule into reach. She turned image into income. She turned every stereotype she was handed into a product she could sell. They said she wasn't real. They said she wasn't ready. They said she was famous for nothing. But nothing became something when it was packaged, licensed, monetized, and distributed across 100 countries. And that's the legacy. Not the parties. Not the pink. Not even the perfume bottles lining shelves across the globe. Her legacy is the inversion. She taught the world that power isn't always loud, that wealth doesn't always announce itself, that genius can come in glitter. She never needed to convince the critics. She just needed to keep winning. Because in the end, Paris Hilton didn't redefine fame. She redefined what could be done with it. And beneath every sequin, behind every smile, beyond every camera flash, she left behind something more permanent than any headline. Proof. That perception is currency. And when you control the perception, you control the market. Subscribe to Money and Fame. Which celebrity's financial story should we tell next? Write it in the comments. Thank you, and see you soon.